T sat alone one evening in his study, the amber glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across mahogany shelves lined with unread books and unopened gifts. Rain tapped gently against the window, a soft rhythm that seemed to echo the hollow space inside his chest. At 58, Victor had everything the world told him he should want, except peace. "You've built an empire," his lawyer had said just that afternoon, handing him quarterly reports thick with success. "And yet," Victor replied, not looking up, "I can't remember the last time I heard my daughter laugh." Clara, his only child, the girl who used to wait by the window every Sunday, convinced her father would come home early just this once. She'd drawn him pictures, stick-figure families holding hands under smiling suns. He'd kept everyone tucked away in a drawer he hadn't opened in years. Now she barely spoke to him, not out of anger, but something worse, resignation. As if she'd already accepted that love from him came with conditions he couldn't meet. Victor poured himself a glass of whiskey, neat, no ice, and stared at the family portrait on the wall. It was taken 10 years ago, before the divorce finalized, before the board meetings swallowed his evenings, before he started mistaking presents for provision. In the photo, Clara was 12, her eyes bright with trust, her hand resting lightly on his knee as if she believed, truly believed, that he was her hero. He wasn't, and that truth sat heavier than any debt, sharper than any betrayal. Outside, the city glittered like a promise. But inside, Victor felt like a ghost haunting his own life. He had chosen ambition over bedtime stories, deals over dance recitals, legacy over love. And now, standing in the quiet aftermath of all those choices, he wondered what good was a throne if you had no one left to share it with. The phone buzzed on his desk. "A message from his assistant Sophia arrives tomorrow morning. Shall I prepare the east wing?" He hesitated. Sophia, the daughter of Elena, the woman he'd loved briefly, passionately, and recklessly 2 decades ago. Elena was gone now, taken by illness too sudden to fight. And Sophia, just 22, had nowhere else to go. "I'll do right by her," he murmured to the empty room, as if saying it aloud could make it true. Maybe this time, he thought, he wouldn't fail. Maybe this time he could be the father he never was. But deep down, beneath the hope and the guilt, a quieter voice whispered, "You're not doing this for her. You're doing this to fix what you broke with Clara." He didn't answer it. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the window, pressed his palm against the cold glass, and watched the rain blur the lights of the city into streaks of gold, like tears falling from the sky. And for the first time in years, Victor Langston felt afraid. Not of losing money, not of failure, but of being truly, irrevocably alone. Because wealth could buy loyalty, admiration, even silence. Outside, the city hummed with indifference. But here, in this small sanctuary she'd carved out with part-time teaching wages and stubborn hope, time slowed. Here, she was not Victor Langston's daughter. She was simply Clara, the girl who believed color could heal, that silence could speak, that love didn't need to be loud to be real. She stepped back, wiping her hands on a faded apron stitched with daisies. Her mother's years ago. A photograph sat on the windowsill, a younger Clara, maybe 10, holding up a lopsided clay bowl at a school fair. Her father stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on her shoulder. He was smiling, but his eyes were already distant, already halfway to a meeting he couldn't miss. "I'll be back for dinner," he'd said that day. He never came. Clara touched the frame gently, then turned away. She didn't hate him. That would have been easier. No, what hurt was that she still hoped. Even now, after years of missed birthdays, canceled visits, and conversations that felt like boardroom negotiations, a part of her waited for him to look at her the way he looked at his investments, with focus, with belief, with care. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from her childhood friend. "Maya, did you hear he's taking in Sophia, Elena's daughter, moving her into the penthouse tomorrow?" Clara's breath caught. Elena. The name alone was a ghost in their family history. A whisper her mother used to choke back during late-night arguments. The woman her father had loved before duty, before reputation, before her. And now her daughter was being welcomed into the home. Clara, had once dreamed of filling with laughter, she set down her brush. Her chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with a deeper ache. The kind that comes when you realize you've been replaced not by someone better, but by someone newer. Someone whose pain hasn't yet hardened into disappointment. Later that evening, she walked through the rain to the community center where she taught art to underprivileged kids. 8-year-old Leo held up a drawing of his dad fishing. "He says he'll take me next summer," the boy said, eyes wide with trust. Clara knelt beside him. "Then I hope he does," she whispered, smoothing his hair. "But even if he doesn't, you're still worthy of love." She said it to him, but she needed to hear it herself. Back in her tiny apartment, she lit a single candle and opened her sketchbook to a page titled, "What I Wish He Knew." On it, she'd drawn a little girl standing in a grand hallway, holding a handmade card that read, "I love you, Dad." At the end of the hall, a man in a suit walks away, briefcase in hand, never turning around. Tears blurred the lines, but she didn't wipe them away, because Clara wasn't asking for wealth. She wasn't asking for fame or power. She just wanted to matter, to be seen not as an obligation but as a person, as his daughter. And yet, she knew the truth. Her father didn't choose to ignore her out of malice. He chose distraction over discomfort, legacy over love, guilt over grace. Still, she kept painting. Not for him, for herself. Because somewhere between the blues of longing and the golds of resilience, Reyes, 22, eyes shadowed with grief, hands folded tightly over a worn leather suitcase that held everything she had left in the world. She didn't step out right away. Instead, she stared up at the towering glass facade, the very image of power and permanence, and wondered how someone so broken could belong inside it. Her mother, Elena, had spoken of Victor only in fragments. "He was kind once," she'd said on her last good day, voice thin as paper. But kindness isn't enough when you choose silence over truth. Now Elena was gone, and Victor, this man who had loved her mother in secret, then vanished from their lives for nearly 2 decades, had sent a lawyer, a check, and finally, an invitation, "Come stay with me. Your family." Sophia wasn't sure what family meant anymore, but she had no rent, no safety net, and nowhere else to turn. The elevator rose in hushed silence. When the doors opened, Victor stood waiting, impeccably dressed, posture rigid, eyes betraying something softer than his stance suggested. "Sophia," he said, voice lower than she expected. "You look just like her." She didn't smile. "I hope I'm nothing like her in the ways that mattered to you." The words hung between them, sharp but not cruel. Victor flinched just slightly, then stepped aside. "Your room's ready. East wing. The one with morning light." As she walked past him, suitcase wheels whispering against marble, she noticed the photographs lining the hallway. One caught her eye, a young girl with wild curls and paint-streaked cheeks, grinning beside a half-finished mural. Beneath it, a small plaque read Clara, age 14, City of Dreams mural project. "Who's Clara?" Sophia asked, unable to stop herself. Victor paused. "My daughter." Just that. No warmth, no elaboration. But Sophia saw the way his fingers twitched at his sides, like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Later that evening, over a dinner served by a silent staff in a dining room too large for 2 people, Victor tried to bridge the distance. "You'll start at the university next week," he said, pushing a folder across the table. "Full tuition. Art history if you still want it." Sophia looked up. "How do you know I want that?" "I asked your old professor. After the funeral." She studied him then, not as the tycoon the world knew, but as a man carrying invisible weights. There was guilt in his eyes, yes, but also something else. A desperate kind of hope, as if by helping her, he could somehow undo every wrong he'd ever committed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He set down his fork. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Because I failed someone else. And I won't fail you too." Sophia didn't ask who. She already knew. That night, she wandered the penthouse, lost in its opulence. In the library, she found a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, dozens of drawings. All signed Clara. Birthday cards never sent. Letters addressed to Dad but never mailed. One sketch showed a little girl sitting alone at a grand piano, her reflection warped in the polished wood. Sophia closed the drawer slowly, heart pounding. She hadn't come here to take anyone's place. But already, she felt like an intruder in someone else's sorrow. Downstairs, Victor stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara walking out the front door 6 months ago, suitcase in hand, saying only, "You don't need me here to remind you of what you lost." Now, another young woman lived under his roof, another chance, another ghost of his past. But as the wind tugged at his coat, a chilling thought took root. What if saving Sophia meant losing Clara forever, and worse? What if he didn't even realize he was choosing again inside? Sophia pressed her forehead against the cool window pane, watching his silhouette in the dark. She whispered to the empty room, voice trembling, "I didn't ask to be your redemption." But the house offered no answer. Victor noticed everything, and without realizing it, he began to lean into her presence. He asked about her classes, remembered her favorite tea, stopped mid-sentence during a call once just to watch her laugh at something on her phone. A sound so close to Elena's that it stole his breath. One Saturday morning, over coffee, he slid an envelope across the marble counter. "The gallery downtown, the one you mentioned, I bought the space next door. You can curate student exhibitions there. Start this fall." Sophia stared at the envelope, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said, and for the first time in years it felt true. But truth has echoes. That same afternoon, Clara stood outside the Langston Foundation building, clutching a letter of her own. A grant application for a community art program she'd spent months preparing. She hadn't asked her father for help. She never did. But when the rejection email arrived, vague, impersonal, citing budget reallocations, she couldn't ignore the timing, because the very next day, the local news announced Langston donates $2 million to launch Youth Arts Initiative, curated by Sophia Reyes. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the article. There was a photo of Victor and Sophia at a press event, him with a hand on her shoulder, her smiling with cautious pride. And beneath it, the caption, "A new chapter for Langston legacy," rooted in compassion and second chances. Clara didn't cry. She walked to the river instead, where she used to sit with her mother as a child, watching boats drift away like unanswered questions. Later that night, she called Maya. "He's rewriting history," she said, voice hollow. "As if I never existed. As if we never mattered." "He's not erasing you, Clara," Maya replied gently. "He's just lost." "But I'm still here," Clara whispered. "I've always been here." Back at the penthouse, Victor sat in his study, reviewing blueprints for the new gallery. Sophia entered quietly, holding 2 mugs. "You didn't tell me the grant committee rejected Clara's proposal," she said, placing a mug beside him. He looked up, startled. "How did you?" "I saw her name on the list, buried in the appendix." She paused. "Why didn't you fund both?" "It wasn't my decision alone," he deflected. The board follows you, Victor." Her voice was calm, but firm. "And you chose me." He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, because she was right. "I thought," he began, running a hand through his graying hair. "I thought giving you this chance would heal something, for both of us." "But you're not healing," Sophia said softly. "You're compensating. And in doing that, you're making Clara feel invisible all over again." Victor looked away, jaw tight. The truth stung because it was wrapped in kindness, not accusation but sorrow. The next evening, he found Clara's old piano bench tucked in the storage room, dusty, forgotten. He sat on it, remembering how she'd played Chopin at 13. Tentative at first, then soaring, as if the music could carry her far enough to be seen. Now he heard only silence. And in that silence, a terrible realization settled. He hadn't chosen Sophia over Clara out of malice. He'd done it because loving Clara required facing his failures. Every missed recital, every broken promise, every time he chose power over presence. Loving Sophia was easier. cleaner. She carried no history of disappointment with him, only potential. But love isn't love if it's based on convenience. Downstairs, Sophia stood at the window, watching rain trace paths down the glass. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. Not to Victor, but to Clara. I didn't ask for this role, and I don't want your place. But if you'll let me, I'd like to know you. She hit send, then held her breath. Because the real story wasn't about who lived in the penthouse. It was about who still had the courage to reach across the wreckage and say, I see you. I didn't ask for this role, and I don't want your place. But if you'll let me, I'd like to know you. Clara exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to reply with cold politeness, there's nothing to know. Another part, the one that still remembered what it felt like to be seen, ached to say yes. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she went to work the next morning at the community center, teaching a group of children how to mix colors to capture emotion. Sadness isn't just blue, she told them, dipping her brush into a swirl of violet and gray. It's the shadow under someone's smile when they think no one's looking. One girl, eyes wide, asked, Did your dad ever look at you like that? Clara froze, then smiled gently. Yes, and I'm learning to forgive him for it. That afternoon, Victor called. Clara, he said, voice uncharacteristically tentative. I heard about the grant. I didn't realize it was yours. She didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. I'm not asking for anything, she finally said. Not money, not approval. Just don't pretend I never tried. I know you did, he whispered. And I failed you. For the first time, he didn't justify, didn't deflect, just stood in the wreckage of his own making. Later that week, an envelope arrived at Clara's apartment, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a check, and signed, made out to the Riverlight Art Initiative, for the exact amount she'd requested. And a note in Victor's handwriting, this isn't charity. It's long overdue recognition. You've always been enough. I just forgot how to see it. Her hands trembled, not because of the money, but because, for once, he hadn't spoken through lawyers or press releases. He'd spoken as a father. Still, she didn't cash it. Not yet, because trust wasn't rebuilt in a day or with a signature. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, tension simmered beneath polished surfaces. Victor had begun canceling meetings to attend Sophia's lectures. He'd framed her first published essay and hung it beside his desk. He even started asking her opinion on foundation projects, something he'd never done with Clara, despite her years of quiet suggestions left in forgotten emails. Sophia noticed, and it troubled her. One evening, as they sat in the library, she closed her book and turned to him. You're trying so hard to get it right with me? But are you even talking to Clara? Victor looked away. She won't take my calls. Have you gone to her in person without an agenda? He didn't answer. Sophia leaned forward, voice low but urgent. Victor, I don't need another protector. I need you to stop using me as a shield against your guilt. Because every time you choose me over her, even by accident, you're telling her she doesn't matter. He flinched as if struck. That night, he stood outside Clara's building in the rain, umbrella in hand, heart pounding like a man facing judgment. He didn't knock, just watched her window from across the street. Light glowed softly. She was painting again, her silhouette moving with purpose, alive in a way he'd never seen in his own home. He thought of all the years he'd mistaken silence for strength, distance for control. But real strength was showing up. Real control was choosing love, even when it hurt. Back inside, Clara paused mid-stroke. She felt it, the weight of being watched, not with expectation, but with longing. She walked to the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and saw him. Their eyes met across the rain-slick street. No words, no demands, just a father drenched and trembling, finally seeing his daughter, not as a reflection of his failures, but as a woman who had bloomed anyway. She didn't wave, didn't smile, but she didn't close the curtain either. And in that small, suspended moment, something shifted, not just between them, but within him. Because regret only becomes redemption when it moves you to act. And for the first time in decades, Victor Langston took a step. Not toward power, not toward image, but toward the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. She brewed tea, wrapped herself in her mother's old shawl, and opened the drawer where she kept her childhood journals. Page after page filled with hopes. Dad said he'll come to my art show. Maybe this year he'll remember my birthday. I painted him a portrait. He hasn't hung it yet. Her fingers traced the faded ink. All those years, she hadn't wanted a mansion or a trust fund. She'd wanted one thing, so simple, so human, that it now felt almost foolish to admit. I just wanted him to be proud of me. She whispered to the empty room. Not for what I could do, but for who I am. Not the Langston heir. Not the quiet disappointment. Just Clara. Later that day, she walked to the riverbank, the same spot where she'd sat after reading about Sophia's gallery. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and distant blossoms. And there, on a bench beneath a willow tree, was Sophia. Clara stopped. She hadn't replied to the message, hadn't planned to meet her. Yet here she was. Sophia looked up, eyes wide with surprise and hope. You came. I didn't say I would, Clara said, voice guarded but not cold. No, Sophia admitted, standing slowly. But I hoped. A silence settled between them, fragile as glass. Then Sophia gestured to the space beside her. I used to sit with my mom here. She said rivers remember everything we can't say out loud. Clara hesitated, then sat. For a long while, neither spoke, just watched the water flow. Steady, relentless, carrying secrets downstream. Finally, Clara asked, Why did you reach out? Sophia turned to her, hands folded in her lap. Because I saw your paintings at the community center. The one of the girl waiting by the window, that was you, wasn't it? Clara nodded, throat tight. I didn't know your story, Sophia continued softly, but I saw the love in your brushstrokes and the loneliness, and I realized, I'm living in your house, wearing your father's kindness like a borrowed coat, while you're out here building something real, something honest. Clara looked away, blinking fast. He doesn't see it. He never has. He sees it now, Sophia said. He just doesn't know how to say it. Clara laughed bitterly. He spent 20 years saying nothing. Why should now be different? Because now he's afraid, Sophia said quietly. Afraid that if he waits any longer, you'll disappear for good. Clara went still. And what about you? Do you want me gone? Sophia's eyes filled. No, I want you to stay. Not because I need your forgiveness, but because he needs you. And maybe I do too. Clara studied her then, not as a rival, not as an intruder, but as another daughter shaped by Victor's choices, just from a different angle. One raised in absence, the other in silence. Both longing for the same impossible thing to be chosen, not out of guilt, but out of love. What do you want, Clara? Sophia asked gently. Really? Clara closed her eyes. The answer rose like breath from deep within her. I don't want his money. I don't even want his apologies. I want him to sit with me, not as Victor Langston, billionaire, just as Dad. Even if it's only for 10 minutes. Even if he says nothing. I want him to stay. Sophia reached out slowly and placed her hand over Clara's. It was warm, real. Then tell him, she said, before it's too late. That evening, Clara stood outside the penthouse again. But this time, she didn't linger in the shadows. She pressed the intercom. Victor answered instantly, voice rough with sleepless nights. Clara, I'm coming up, she said. Don't prepare anything. Don't call staff. Just be there. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Victor stood in the hallway in a simple sweater. No tie, hair uncombed, older, softer, more human than she'd ever seen him. She stepped out, didn't hug him, didn't smile, just looked into his eyes and said, I want to show you something. She led him to the library, to the very shelf where Sophia had found her old drawings. She pulled out a sketchbook, newer, worn at the edges, and opened it to a page titled The Father I Remember. showed a man reading to a little girl under a blanket fort, flashlight casting golden light on their faces. That never happened, Victor whispered, voice breaking. No, Clara said softly. But it's what I wished for. Every night. He sank into the chair, tears finally falling. Quiet, unguarded, decades overdue. And Clara, she didn't walk away. She sat beside him, not as a daughter demanding justice, but as a woman offering grace. I thought providing for you was enough, he said, voice raw. I gave you everything: schools, security, opportunities. Clara closed the sketchbook gently. You gave me everything except yourself. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the room. Victor looked down at his hands. Hands that had signed billion-dollar deals but never held hers at a school play, never wiped her tears after a nightmare. I didn't know how to be what you needed, he admitted, almost inaudibly. Because you were too busy trying to be perfect, she said, not with anger, but with sorrow. And perfection doesn't hug. It doesn't stay. It just watches from a distance. He swallowed hard. I thought if I built something lasting, you'd understand why I was gone. That one day, you'd look at my name on buildings and feel proud. I was never proud of your name, Clara said softly. I wanted to be proud of you. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A low warning, as if the sky sensed the storm brewing within these walls. Upstairs, Sophia stood at the top of the grand staircase, having heard the elevator chime. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but now she couldn't move. She watched them through the balusters. Father and daughter, closer in this moment than they'd been in decades, and felt both relief and dread, because healing wasn't linear, and old patterns had roots. The next morning, Victor woke with a strange urgency in his chest. For the first time in years, he canceled his 7 a.m. board call. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, made coffee, 2 cups, and sat at the table where Clara used to eat breakfast alone as a child. When she appeared an hour later, surprised to find him there, he didn't offer excuses, just pushed a cup toward her. You take it black, right? He asked. She nodded, eyes wary but softening. Since I was 16. He remembered then, faintly, the day she declared, I'm old enough to drink it like an adult. He'd been on his phone, already halfway out the door. Now he stayed. They talked. Not about money, not about the past, but about her students, her favorite painters, the way rain sounded different in the city versus the countryside. Small things, human things. But that afternoon, everything shifted again. A courier arrived with documents, the final approval for Sophia's gallery launch, an event scheduled for the same weekend as Clara's long-planned community art fair. The foundation had poured resources into Sophia's opening press coverage, VIP guests, a feature in Art Monthly. Clara's event listed as a local outreach initiative with minimal support. Sophia found Victor in his office holding the schedule. You didn't even tell me they conflicted, she said, voice tight. I assumed Clara's was smaller, he replied, distracted. We can send a donation. It's not about the money, Sophia snapped, then caught herself, lowered her voice. It's about presence, Victor. You're choosing again. Not with malice, but with habit. He frowned. I'm supporting you. Isn't that what you wanted? No, she said, stepping closer. What I wanted was for you to see both of us, not replace one with the other. Clara's event matters just as much. Maybe more, because she built it without you. Victor opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because deep down he knew. He'd fallen back into the old rhythm, fixating on the new wound to avoid the old scar. That evening, he went to Clara's tiny apartment unannounced. She was packing supplies for the fair, canvases, brushes, handmade flyers. I'm moving the gallery launch, he said without preamble. She looked up, startled. What? I'm postponing it. 2 weeks. So I can be at yours. She studied him, searching for the catch, the hidden condition. But his eyes held only resolve. Why? She asked. Because I finally understand, he said, voice thick. You don't need me to fund your dream. You need me to witness it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. And Sophia, she asked quietly. She agrees, he said. More than that, she insisted. A pause. Then Clara whispered, You really mean it. I've spent my life choosing legacy over love, he said. This time, I choose you. Outside, the city lights flickered as rain began to fall again. Not harsh, but gentle, like forgiveness washing over stone. And in that moment, Clara saw not the titan of industry, not the distant father, but a man finally learning how to come home. But even as hope bloomed, a quiet fear lingered. Could a lifetime of absence truly be undone by a single act of presence, or was the real test still ahead? When the cameras left, the events ended, and all that remained was the daily choice to stay. Only time would tell. But for now, in the hush of her small apartment, father and daughter stood side by side. But inside the penthouse, Sophia wrestled with a different kind of silence. She watched Victor leave each day with a duffel bag of supplies, his eyes brighter than they'd been in years. She should have been happy for him, for them, but a quiet unease settled in her chest. Not jealousy, not resentment, something deeper: guilt. Because every time Victor chose to be with Clara, Sophia felt the weight of her own presence in his life, the unspoken truth that she had become the catalyst for his awakening, yet also the symbol of his past betrayal. One rainy afternoon, she found herself standing outside Clara's community center, hidden beneath an awning across the street. Through the window, she saw Victor kneeling beside a group of children, helping them glue mosaic tiles onto a mural. Clara stood nearby, laughing, really laughing, as paint splattered his expensive shirt. He didn't flinch, didn't check his watch, just smiled, as if this moment mattered more than any boardroom. Sophia's breath caught. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed seeing him human. That evening, back at the penthouse, Victor returned soaked and exhausted, but peaceful. He found Sophia in the library, staring at the empty fireplace. You didn't come today, he said gently. I didn't want to intrude, she replied, not looking up. He sat beside her. You're not intruding. You're part of this too. Am I? She asked, voice trembling. Or am I just the reason you finally looked at her? He went still. Sophia? No, she said, turning to him, eyes glistening. I need you to hear this. I love that you're trying with Clara, but don't let your guilt turn me into a saint and her into a ghost. We're both real. We both matter. And I won't be the excuse you use to avoid facing what you did to her. Victor stared at her, stunned by her clarity. I never meant to hurt either of you. But you did, she whispered. And healing isn't about choosing who deserves your love more. It's about making space for both. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock, a sound that had once marked the passage of time in a life lived at a distance. Then, softly, Victor said, What do you need from me, Sophia? She took a shaky breath. I need you to stop treating me like a second chance. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here because my mother loved you, and because, despite everything, I think you're capable of doing better. He reached out, slowly, and covered her hand with his. Then help me do better. The next morning, something shifted. Instead of heading straight to Clara's, Victor waited. When Sophia came downstairs, he handed her a key. The East Wing studio, you've been using it, but it's too small. There's a larger space on the third floor. Natural light, room for sculpture, painting, whatever you need. She blinked. You remembered I wanted to work in 3D. I listen now, he said simply. Later that day, he called Clara. I'll be late this afternoon. Sophia's moving her studio. I promised I'd help. Clara paused on the other end. Then quietly, good. She deserves that too. And just like that, the triangle that had once felt like a battlefield began to soften into something else. Something resembling family. But tension still simmered beneath the surface. At the final prep meeting for the art fair, a volunteer mentioned the press coverage. They're sending a reporter from the Chronicle, she said excitedly. Said they heard Victor Langston's long-lost daughter is behind this. Clara froze. I'm not lost. I've been here all along. Victor, standing nearby, turned pale. Who told them that? No one answered. But later, Sophia pulled him aside. "It wasn't me," she said firmly. "But someone in your foundation is still framing this as a redemption story, with Clara as the tragic footnote." Victor's jaw tightened. Not anymore. That night, he sent a company-wide memo effective immediately. All public references to Clara Langston must reflect her role as founder and lead artist of Riverlight Initiative. This is not a charity project. It is her vision. Honor it accordingly. He didn't stop there. He called the newspaper himself. "Her name is Clara Langston. She is my daughter, and she doesn't need to be found. She's been building something beautiful while the rest of us were too busy to notice." When Clara heard what he'd done, she didn't cry. She just nodded, as if finally believing he meant it. Yet, as the fair's opening day neared, a new fear crept in, not of abandonment, but of expectation. What if this was just another performance? What if, once the crowd dispersed and the cameras left, he'd retreat again into the safety of silence? Sophia sensed it. The night before the event, she showed up at Clara's door with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and a worn copy of The Little Prince. "He used to read this to me when I was little," she said. "My mom said your dad gave it to her." Clara opened it. On the first page, in faded ink for Elena, who sees stars even in the darkest rooms. V. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, sipping in silence. "He's trying," Sophia said at last. "I know," Clara replied. "But do you believe he'll stay?" Clara looked out the window at the city lights. "I don't know, but for the first time, I think I'm ready to find out." And somewhere, in the quiet space between hope and fear, the real test, because despite Victor's presence over the past weeks, despite the late-night talks and shared silences, a quiet dread coiled in her chest. She'd seen this before. The grand gesture, the sudden attention, the fleeting warmth, and then the slow fade, the return to business, the unspoken retreat. She didn't want a performance. She wanted permanence. Victor arrived early, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. Clothes that said, "I'm here as a person, not a name." He carried a box of pastries and 2 thermoses of coffee. Without a word, he began setting up chairs beside Sophia, who'd come to help. Clara watched them from across the yard. Her father and the woman who'd once felt like a threat, now working side by side, laughing softly over a tangled string of fairy lights. It should have felt strange. Instead, it felt possible. But fate has a way of testing hope just when it starts to bloom. Mid-morning, as guests began to arrive, local families, teachers, even a few curious reporters, Victor's phone buzzed insistently. He ignored it at first, then again, and again. Finally, he stepped aside, voice low. "What is it?" His assistant's voice crackled through the line. "Sir, the Singapore deal is collapsing. The investors are demanding your presence on a call in 20 minutes. They're threatening to pull out entirely." Victor closed his eyes. "Not today. Victor, this is $300 million. The board is already in emergency session." He looked back at the courtyard, at Clara kneeling beside a little girl, helping her mix paint, at Sophia hanging a banner that read, "Every voice is color," at the mural they'd all painted together, alive with joy and resilience. "I'll call you back," he said, and ended the call. But 10 minutes later, it rang again, and again, urgent, relentless. This time, Clara saw him pacing near the oak tree, hand raking through his hair, face tight with conflict. Her stomach dropped. She walked over slowly. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated. "It's work. A crisis." On the day of my fair, her voice was quiet, but sharp with old wounds. "It's not my choice, Clara," he said, frustration edging his tone. "If I don't take this call, people lose jobs. Companies fold. And if you leave," she said, meeting his eyes, "I lose something too." He opened his mouth, to explain, to justify, but stopped. Because in her gaze, he saw not anger, but resignation. The same look she'd worn the day she walked out of his life. "You always have a reason," she whispered, "and I always understand. But understanding doesn't fill the empty chair." Before he could respond, his phone rang again. This time he answered. Clara didn't wait. She turned and walked back to the fair, forcing a smile as she greeted guests, but her hands trembled. Inside, something fractured, not loudly, but deeply, like glass cracking under pressure no one else can see. Sophia noticed. She found Clara behind the supply tent, staring at nothing. "He's going to leave, isn't he?" Clara asked, voice hollow. "I don't know," Sophia said. "But if he does, it won't be because you don't matter. It'll be because he still hasn't learned how to choose what truly lasts." Minutes later, Victor approached them, phone in hand, face pale. "The call's in 15 minutes, he said. "I have to go back to the penthouse. Secure line. I'll be back as soon as—" "No," Clara interrupted, calm now, eerily so. "Don't come back. Clara, you've made your choice," she said, eyes glistening but steady. Again, he reached for her arm. "Please, just this once. Trust me." She pulled away gently. "I did. That's why it hurts." And then, without another word, she walked back into the crowd, smiling, guiding, creating. While inside, she was already gone. Victor stood frozen, phone buzzing in his hand like a ticking bomb. He looked at Sophia, searching for an answer. She met his gaze, voice soft but firm. "You can save the deal, or you can save her. You can't do both." He stared at the courtyard, at the mural, at the children, at the daughter who had built beauty from abandonment, and realized with crushing clarity that he was about to repeat the very mistake that had cost him decades. The phone rang again. This time he silenced it. Then, slowly, he walked toward the stage where Clara stood introducing the student showcase. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just took a seat in the front row, the only empty chair, and stayed. When her eyes met his, surprise flickered, then something deeper, fragile, trembling hope. He gave her a single nod. "I'm here." And for the first time in his life, Victor Langston let the world burn, so he could finally be present for the one person who never asked for his quiet tension hummed. Unseen, unspoken, yet thick enough to taste. Clara stood alone by the mural now, fingers tracing the outline of a small figure holding a lantern. The symbol she'd added last night, after another sleepless hour wondering if her father's presence had been real or just another fleeting performance. He hadn't left. Not once. He'd stayed through every speech, every child's shy presentation, even helped clean up spilled paint without complaint. And yet, she couldn't shake the memory of that phone call. The way his body had tensed, the old reflex to choose duty over devotion rising like a ghost from his bones. Victor approached slowly, hands in his pockets, as if afraid to startle her. "You did something extraordinary today," he said softly. She didn't look at him. "I've been doing it for years. You just never saw it." The words weren't cruel, just tired, heavy with history. He swallowed. "I see it now." "Do you?" She finally turned, eyes searching his. "Because if you leave tonight, if you go back to your world of deals and silence, I won't wait for you to find your way back again. I can't." He stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere." "But you always do," she whispered. "Even when you stay, part of you is already gone. Calculating, managing, escaping into control. I don't want half of you, Dad. I never did." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant chime of a bicycle bell and the rustle of drying banners. Then, from the edge of the courtyard, Sophia appeared, holding 2 paper cups of tea. She handed one to Clara, one to Victor, and sat on the bench beside them without a word. After a moment, she said, "My mom used to say love isn't measured in grand moments. It's measured in what you do when no one's watching." Victor looked down at his untouched tea. "I failed that test for 20 years. Maybe," Sophia said gently, "but tests can be retaken." Clara exhaled, tears finally spilling over. "I'm so tired of hoping." "I know," Victor said, voice breaking, "and I don't deserve your hope, but I'm asking for a chance, not to fix everything, but to show up. Every day, even when it's hard, even when I mess up." She studied him, the lines around his eyes deeper now, the pride in his posture softened by humility. This wasn't the untouchable titan anymore. This was a man who'd finally let himself be seen in his brokenness. Still, trust wasn't rebuilt in an evening. The next morning, Clara packed a single suitcase. Not out of anger, not out of defeat, but out of self-preservation. She left before dawn, slipping out of her apartment while the city still slept. In her bag clothes, sketchbooks, her mother's shawl, and the unsigned check Victor had given her weeks ago. Still uncashed, still waiting. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. Her absence would say everything. By midday, Victor stood in her empty studio, heart pounding. The easel was bare. The shelves cleared. Only a single painting remained on the wall. A new one, finished just last night. It showed 3 figures standing at a crossroads, one looking back, one looking forward, and one reaching out between them. Beneath it, in small script, love doesn't force. It waits. His knees nearly gave out. Sophia found him there, staring at the canvas like it held the answer to a prayer he'd forgotten how to speak. "She's gone," he said, voice hollow. "Or she's giving you a choice," Sophia replied quietly. "Not as Victor Langston, billionaire, but as a father who finally knows what's at stake." He turned to her, eyes raw. "What if I lose her for good this time?" "Then you'll have to live with that," Sophia said, not unkindly. "But if you truly mean what you said last night, you'll follow her. Not to pull her back, but to stand beside her, wherever she is." That evening, Victor didn't return to the penthouse. He walked instead to the riverbank, the same spot where Clara and Sophia had first met. He sat on the bench beneath the willow tree, the one place where his empire meant nothing, and waited. Hours passed. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. He didn't move. And then, just as the streetlights flickered on, footsteps approached. Clara stopped a few feet away, umbrella in hand, suitcase at her side. "You came back," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "No," he replied, standing slowly. "I never left. I just finally learned where I belong." She looked into his eyes, searching for the old evasion, the practiced calm, the retreat behind power. But all she saw was truth, raw, unpolished, real. "And if I go," she asked, "if I take this job in Lisbon, the residency I was offered last month, will you disappear again?" He didn't flinch. "Then I'll visit. Not for a weekend. For as long as you'll have me. I'll learn Portuguese if I have to." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Why now? Why not 10 years ago?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I let myself feel how much I'd lost, I'd drown in it. But you taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even late." She stepped closer. "I'm not asking for perfect." "Good," he said, voice trembling, "because all I have is this, messy, flawed, and yours." For a long moment, they stood in the rain, the city humming around them, the past heavy at their backs. Then Clara reached out and took his hand, not because she'd forgotten, but because she finally believed he was trying. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. But as they walked away together, suitcase wheels rolling softly over wet pavement, one question lingered in the air, unanswered. Would this time be different, or was the real test still ahead? When the cameras were gone, the emotions settled, and all that remained was the daily, quiet choice to stay. Only time would tell. But for now, under the silver glow of streetlights and falling rain, "You really mean it," she said at last, not as a challenge, but as a plea for certainty. "You'll come to Lisbon even if I don't ask you to." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, she saw no calculation in his eyes, no rehearsed response. Just a man stripped bare by regret and hope. "I'll be there," he said, "not because you need me, but because I need to be the kind of man you deserve." She swallowed hard. "I'm scared, Dad." His breath caught at the word Dad. Not Victor. Not Mr. Langston. Dad. A title he hadn't earned in years, yet one she still offered, fragile and trembling, like a bridge made of spider silk. "Me too," he admitted, voice rough. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Inside the penthouse, Sophia sat alone in the library, the silence heavier than usual. She'd watched them leave from the window, Clara's hesitant steps, Victor's careful distance, the way they'd finally touched hands like two people relearning a language long forgotten. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt untethered. Because now that Victor was choosing Clara, truly choosing her, where did that leave Sophia? She wasn't his daughter by blood. Not by law, just by accident, grief, and a love her mother had never fully explained. And though she'd never wanted to replace Clara, she'd begun to wonder, did I ever belong here at all? The next morning, she packed a small bag. Not much, just clothes, her mother's journal, a few sketches. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Thank you for giving me shelter. But I need to find my own ground. I'll be at Maya's for a while. Sophia, she didn't say goodbye. She couldn't, because if she looked into Victor's eyes one more time, she'd see the guilt, the fear that he was losing her too, and she didn't want to be another wound in his healing. But fate had other plans. As she stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, she nearly collided with Victor, who'd returned early to check on her. Sophia, his voice cracked. Where are you going? She clutched her bag tighter. I can't stay. Why not? He stepped closer, eyes wide with panic. Did I do something wrong? No, she said quickly. You did everything right. That's the problem. He frowned. I don't understand. She took a shaky breath. You're finally giving Clara what she always needed, and I'm happy for her. I really am. But every time you look at me, I see you thinking, this is the daughter I didn't fail, and I can't live in that shadow. I need to know who I am, not as your redemption, but as myself. He went very still. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I was going to give this to you today, he said. Before everything happened. She opened it. It was a deed, transferring ownership of the third-floor studio to her name, along with a modest trust fund for her education and future projects. I'm not giving you this because I owe you, he said gently. I'm giving it because you've earned it. Your vision, your voice, they matter. Not because of me. In spite of me. Tears welled in her eyes. But what if I don't want your money? Then don't take it, he said simply. But don't run because you think you're in the way. You're not. You're part of this family, not because of Elena, not because of guilt, but because you showed up when no one asked you to. And you told me the truth when everyone else stayed silent. Her breath hitched. I don't want to be a footnote in your story. You're not, he said, voice thick. You're a chapter, and so is Clara. And maybe I'm finally learning how to read both. A long silence settled between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city waking up. Then, softly, Sophia whispered, what if I stay? But not here. What if I move into the artist's loft downtown? The one near Clara's new space. Victor's eyes softened. Then I'll visit you both. Not as a benefactor, as a father trying to get it right. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw not the man who'd chosen her over his daughter, but the man who was finally choosing both. Later that day, Clara returned to her apartment to find Victor sitting on her doorstep, coffee in hand, eyes tired but steady. I talked to Sophia, he said. She's staying in the city. Near you. Clara blinked. You didn't try to keep her in the penthouse. No, he said, because home isn't a place. It's who you choose to be with. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. He followed slowly, respectfully. On her table sat an envelope, Sophia's handwriting on the front. Inside was a sketch, 3 figures again, but this time they weren't at a crossroads. They were walking together down a sunlit path, shoulders almost touching. Beneath it, a note, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be willing. Clara looked at Victor, tears spilling freely now. Do you think we can do this, all of us? He didn't promise forever, didn't offer guarantees, just took her hand and said, let's try. And in that moment, beneath the weight of past mistakes and the fragile hope of words were too heavy. He'd even started sketching again. Clumsy, hesitant lines on napkins. But he showed them to Clara anyway, and she'd smile, not at the art, but at the effort. But peace is never static. It breathes, and sometimes it cracks. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows of Clara's apartment, Victor sat on her couch, scrolling through emails on his tablet. The foundation's quarterly report glowed on the screen. Profits up, investments stable, reputation restored. On paper, everything was perfect. Yet he felt hollow, because for the first time in his life, success didn't feel like victory. Felt like noise. Clara looked up from her canvas. "You're quiet," he sighed, setting the tablet aside. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this feeling of being enough to vanish." She put down her brush. "Why would it?" "Because I spent decades believing my worth was tied to what I built," he said, voice low. "Now I'm learning it's tied to who I am, and that's terrifying." She walked over and sat beside him. "You don't have to be perfect, Dad. You just have to be here." He turned to her, eyes glistening. What if here isn't enough? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. A call from his CFO. He ignored it. Then another, and another. Clara watched him tense, the old reflex rising like a tide. "You can answer it," she said gently. "I won't leave." He hesitated. Then slowly he picked up the phone. "Make it quick." The voice on the other end was urgent. "Victor, the board's moving forward with the merger. They've scheduled the vote for tomorrow. If you don't show, they'll assume you've stepped back, and Langston Holdings could be dismantled." Victor went still. "Dismantled how?" "Asset liquidation. Restructuring. Your name. It might not survive." Clara saw the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared, the mask sliding back into place. Not out of arrogance, but fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of becoming nothing. He ended the call and stood abruptly. "I have to go back, just for a few days, to secure the company." Clara didn't move. "And then what? You'll come back?" "I swear it," he said, already reaching for his coat. But this time she didn't believe him. Not fully, because the truth wasn't in his words. It was in his eyes. They were already distant, already calculating exits and contingencies. The man who'd sat with her through tears was retreating behind the armor of control. That night she called Sophia. "He's leaving," she said, voice flat. "Says it's temporary." Sophia was silent for a long moment. Then, "Did he look at you when he said it?" "No," Clara whispered. "He looked at his shoes." "I know that look," Sophia said softly. "It's the look of a man running back to what he knows, because staying is too hard." The next morning, Victor packed a suitcase in the penthouse. Efficient, focused, already rehearsing boardroom arguments in his head. But as he zipped the bag, he caught sight of two things on his dresser: a small clay bowl Clara had made in elementary school, and a sketch Sophia had left. A portrait of him reading to them both, though it had never happened. His hands trembled. He sank onto the bed, head in his hands. For the first time, he asked himself the question he'd avoided for years: what am I really afraid of losing? Not the company, not the legacy, but the chance to be loved, not for what he owned, but for who he was becoming. Downstairs, his car waited. The driver held the door open, but Victor didn't move. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed the board chairman. "I'm not coming," he said, voice steady. "Vote without me. Do what you must. But my name stays on one thing only: the Riverlight Initiative and Sophia's studio. Everything else, you can have." He hung up before the man could argue. Then he walked out, not to the car, but to the subway station. He took the local train to Clara's neighborhood, then walked the last 10 blocks in the drizzle, briefcase forgotten, tie loosened, heart pounding. When she opened the door, she saw it immediately: the absence of the mask. The raw, unguarded truth in his eyes. "You stayed," she said, breathless. "I chose," he replied. "Not the empire. Not the illusion of control. You." She didn't cry. She just pulled him inside, wrapped her arms around him, and held on like she was anchoring him to the earth. Later, Sophia arrived with takeout and paint-stained jeans. She found them in the kitchen, Victor awkwardly stirring soup while Clara laughed at his technique. She leaned against the doorway, smiling softly. "So, the great Victor Langston cooks now," he looked up, sheepish. "Still learning." "That's all any of us are doing," Sophia said, stepping inside. learning how to be human together. And in that ordinary kitchen, filled with steam and laughter and the scent of garlic and rain, something sacred unfolded. Not grand, not dramatic, but deeply real. Because redemption isn't a single act. It's 1,000 small choices to stay when it's easier to run, to listen when it's safer to speak, to love when it's riskier than power. And as the three of them sat around the table, no titles, no past, just presence. Exhibitions by local youth, and walls alive with color that told stories money couldn't buy. She still taught, still painted, but now she did it with a lightness in her chest she hadn't known since childhood. Victor rarely wore suits anymore. He'd sold his penthouse, not out of ruin but intention, and moved into a modest apartment just 10 blocks from Clara's studio. He still consulted on legacy projects, but only those aligned with education or the arts. The rest he let go. Piece by piece, he shed the armor of empire until all that remained was a man learning to live with open hands. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara stood in front of a new mural, a collaboration between her students and Sophia's sculpture class. It depicted 3 trees growing from the same roots, branches interwoven, leaves in every shade of gold and crimson. Sophia approached, holding 2 paper cups of spiced cider. "They're calling it the family tree," she said, handing one to Clara. "Even though none of them know our story." Clara smiled faintly. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they just feel it. Just then, Victor appeared at the edge of the courtyard, carrying a canvas under his arm. His latest attempt at painting. He'd been taking lessons from one of Clara's students, a shy 12-year-old who called him Mr. V and corrected his brushstrokes without fear. He set the canvas down carefully. It was messy, overworked in places, timid in others, but full of heart. A simple scene, a bench by the river, 3 figures sitting close, backs turned to the viewer, watching the sunset. "It's not good," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's honest," Clara replied, touching his shoulder. "That's better." He looked at her, eyes soft. "I never thought I'd be proud of something this imperfect." "You're learning," Sophia said, nudging him gently. "And hey, you finally got the perspective right." They laughed, the sound warm and easy, weaving through the falling leaves like music. But beneath the peace, a quiet storm brewed inside Victor, because success had once been measured in acquisitions. Now it was measured in moments, and he was terrified of losing them. That night, alone in his apartment, he stared at an email he hadn't shown anyone. A formal offer from a European consortium. "We wish to acquire Langston Holdings' remaining cultural assets, including naming rights to Riverlight and the Reyes Studio. Offer $120 million. The money could secure Clara and Sophia's work for decades, but it would also erase his name from their legacies, replace Langston with a corporate brand, turn their sanctuary into a branded experience. He sat at his desk, pen hovering over the contract. Sign and ensure their future. Refuse and risk everything if funding dried up. His hands shook. The next morning, he didn't go to Clara's studio. He went to the riverbank instead, their old meeting place, and waited. When she found him, she knew something was wrong. "You've been distant," she said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at her. "There's an offer. To buy everything. River Light, Sophia's space, even the foundation." Her breath caught. "And they'll fund you both indefinitely. Full autonomy. But they'd rebrand it. Your names would stay, but Langston would disappear." She was silent for a long time. "Then is that what you want?" "No," he whispered. "But I'm scared. What if I fail you again? What if my name becomes a liability instead of a bridge?" She turned to him, eyes fierce with love. "Dad, listen to me. Riverlight isn't yours because you funded it. It's ours because we built it, together. And your name, it doesn't belong on a plaque. It belongs in the way you show up, in the way you stayed." He looked at her, tears welling. "What if that's not enough?" "It already is," she said, taking his hand. "We don't need their money. We have each other. And that's more than enough." Later that day, he called the consortium. "I decline," he said simply. "My legacy isn't for sale. Then he walked straight to Sophia's loft, where she was welding a new sculpture, a spiral of reclaimed metal shaped like an open hand. "I turned it down," he said. She stopped, goggles pushed up, sweat on her brow. "Good. You're not even going to ask why," she smiled. "Because I already know. You finally realized your worth isn't in what you own, but in who you love." He exhaled, as if releasing a burden he'd carried for 50 years. That evening, the three of them gathered at Clara's for dinner. Take-out pizza, mismatched plates, laughter echoing off paint-splattered walls. No agenda, no performance, just presence. And as Victor watched Clara teach Sophia how to mix the perfect shade of twilight blue, he felt something he hadn't in decades, not pride in what he'd built, but peace in who he'd become. Victor sat on a stool nearby, sanding a base for her sculpture. Sleeves rolled up, hands roughened by work he once would have deemed beneath him. He didn't speak much these days unless spoken to. He'd learned that silence, when shared with care, could be its own kind of language. But tonight, something was different. Sophia kept glancing at him, watching the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking, the way his fingers lingered too long on old photographs tucked in his coat pocket. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, setting down her chisel. He looked up, startled. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? You've been distant," she said gently. "Even when you're here." He sighed, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I keep thinking about Elena, about how she never got to see any of this." Sophia softened. Her mother's name rarely passed his lips. When it did, it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid apologies. "She'd be proud of you," Sophia said quietly. "Not for the money you gave up, but for the man you became." He shook his head. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up, even when you're broken." A long silence settled between them, filled only by the crackle of the space heater and the distant chime of church bells. Then, hesitantly, Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a simple silver locket, tarnished with age, engraved with the initials EL. "I kept this after she left," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself I'd give it to you one day, but I was afraid you'd see it as guilt, not as love." Sophia's breath caught. She'd seen this locket in her mother's old photos, worn every day until the chain broke. She took it gently, fingers trembling. She used to say this locket held her best memories. "It holds mine too," he said, eyes glistening. "The ones I almost threw away." She closed her hand around it, tears spilling silently. For the first time, she didn't feel like an accident or a burden. She felt like a bridge between two people who'd loved imperfectly, but loved deeply. Later that evening, Clara arrived with soup and fresh bread, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She found them sitting side by side on the floor, the locket open between them, Victor's arm loosely around Sophia's shoulders. She didn't interrupt, just set the food down and joined them. After a while, Sophia spoke. "I've been accepted into the residency in Barcelona. 6 months. Starting in spring." Clara's heart skipped. Victor went very still. "You're going," Clara said. Not a question, but a quiet acknowledgement. Sophia nodded. "It's everything I've worked for, but I'm scared." Of what? Victor asked. "That I'll come back, and things will have changed. That you'll realize you don't need me here anymore." Victor turned to her, eyes fierce. "Sophia, listen to me. You're not needed like a tool. You're wanted like family. And family doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It waits. It grows. It makes space." Clara reached for her hand. "Go. Create. Shine. We'll be here when you return." Sophia looked between them. These two souls who'd once been strangers, then rivals, now anchors, and felt something bloom in her chest, belonging. But as the night deepened, a new fear stirred in Victor. Because Clara had been quieter than usual, distant in her own way. When they walked home together through the snow, he finally asked, "What's on your mind?" She stopped beneath a street lamp, breath curling in the cold air. "I've been offered a solo exhibition in Lisbon." A full gallery. They want my family tree series. His stomach dropped. Lisbon for how long? Indefinitely, she said softly. They want me to stay, to teach, to build something there. He didn't speak, just stared at the snow falling between them like silent questions. I don't want to leave you again, she whispered. But I also can't stop growing. He took a shaky breath. Then grow. I won't hold you back. But will you come, she asked, eyes searching his. Not as a visitor. As someone who stays, he looked at her. Really looked, and saw not the little girl waiting by the window, but the woman who'd built beauty from abandonment. And he knew love wasn't possession. It was release with trust. I'll come, he said, voice thick. Not because I have to, because I choose to. She stepped closer, snow catching in her hair. Even if it's hard, especially then. And in that frozen moment, beneath a sky full of stars and falling snow, a father and daughter stood not as ghosts of the past, but as witnesses to each other's future, ready to walk separate paths, but never truly apart. Been his office in the Langston Tower, now stripped of mahogany desks and gilded frames, reduced to bare floors and echoing silence. The company hadn't collapsed, not exactly, but it had changed. Without his daily command, without his iron grip, it had softened, restructured, become something leaner, quieter, less his. He'd sold most of his shares months ago, quietly, without announcement. The money had gone into endowments for Clara's Riverlight Initiative and Sophia's Artist Residency Fund. No naming rights, no press releases, just security wrapped in humility. But today he wasn't thinking about legacy. He was thinking about loss. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. A message from his accountant, final transfer complete. Remaining liquid assets $217,000. Recommend conservative budgeting. He stared at the number. Once it would have been a rounding error. Now it was everything. He walked out of the tower for the last time, hands in his pockets, shoulders lighter than they'd been in decades, and yet heavier with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of irrelevance. Of becoming a man with no place, no purpose, no power to protect the ones he loved. That evening, he didn't go to Clara's studio or Sophia's loft. He went to the riverbank instead, their sacred ground, and sat on the bench beneath the willow, watching dusk paint the water in gold and violet. Footsteps approached. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. You've been avoiding us, Clara said softly, sitting beside him. I haven't, he replied, though his voice betrayed him. You canceled dinner twice. You didn't answer Sophia's calls. And you haven't shown up at Riverlight in weeks. He looked down at his hands, no longer smooth, no longer commanding, just human. I didn't want you to see me like this. Like what, she asked gently. Human, he exhaled sharply. Broken. You were always broken, Dad, she said, not unkindly. You just used money to hide it. He flinched, then nodded. I don't have that shield anymore. And yet, she said, turning to him, eyes steady. You're still here, still choosing us. That's more than money ever bought. He swallowed hard. What if I can't give you the life you deserve? I never wanted your life, she said, voice trembling with emotion. I wanted you, and you're right here. A silence settled between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through branches. Then, quietly, he admitted, I'm scared, Clara, not of being poor, but of being unnecessary. She took his hand, rough, aging, real, and held it tightly. You could lose every dollar, every title, every building with your name on it, and you'd still be necessary to me, because you stayed. When it mattered, when it hurt, when you had every reason to walk away, you chose to stay. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't look away. I don't know how to be anything other than what I was. Then let us show you, she said. Let us love you. Not for what you built, but for who you are now. Later that night, Sophia found him in his small apartment, surrounded by boxes labeled Donate and Keep. He was holding a framed photo, Clara at 5, riding on his shoulders in the park, both of them laughing like the world was light. Sophia sat on the floor beside him. You're not losing yourself, Victor. You're finding him. He looked at her, weary. Who is he? The man who reads bedtime stories even when he's tired, who shows up with soup when someone's sick, who paints badly but tries anyway. That's who you are now. And he's enough. Victor closed his eyes. I spent my life chasing greatness. But maybe greatness was always in the small things I ignored. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. Then start noticing them again. The next morning, he didn't check stock prices. He didn't call his lawyer. Instead, he walked to the community center and asked if they needed help fixing leaky faucets in the art room. The director, surprised, handed him a wrench. By noon, he was covered in dust and sweat, laughing with teenagers who called him Mr. V and teased him about his terrible hammering technique. When Clara came by to drop off supplies, she found him kneeling on the floor, tightening a pipe, his shirt stained, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen. She didn't say anything, just smiled, took a photo with her phone, and sent it to Sophia with one word, home. And in that moment, Victor understood he hadn't lost everything. He'd finally gained what mattered. Because true wealth isn't measured in accounts. It's measured in moments where you're seen, not for what you own, but for who you love, and who loves you back. Even when you're broke, he found the gallery easily, its windows glowing with soft light even in the late afternoon. The sign above the door read, Simply Clara Langston. Echoes of home. No mention of Langston Holdings. No corporate gloss. Just her name and the truth behind it. He stood across the street for nearly an hour, watching people enter, locals, tourists, students from the art school down the block. They lingered before each painting, some with tears in their eyes, others pointing, whispering, leaning into the emotion on the canvas. Then he saw her. Clara stood near the back, speaking gently to an elderly woman who clutched a small sketchbook. She wore a paint-splattered dress, her hair loose, her smile easy, unburdened. She looked like someone who had finally come home, even if that home was thousands of miles from where she began. Victor's chest tightened. He almost turned away. What if she'd moved on so completely that his presence felt like an intrusion? What if the man he was now wasn't enough for the life she'd built? But then she looked up and saw him. Time stopped. Her breath caught. The room seemed to hush around her. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she excused herself and walked toward the door. She didn't run, didn't cry out, just opened the door and stepped onto the cobbled street, barefoot, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. You came, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I said I would, he replied, throat tight. She studied him. The lines deeper around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the absence of the sharpness that once defined him. This wasn't the titan who ruled boardrooms. This was a man who'd learned to kneel. Not as Victor Langston, he added softly. Just Dad. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve as if to confirm he was real. I wasn't sure you'd follow through. I almost didn't, he admitted. I stood outside for an hour, afraid you'd look at me and see everything I failed to be. She shook her head, tears glistening. I see everything you've become. He followed her inside, heart pounding as he took in the exhibition. Every painting told a story of absence, of longing, of quiet resilience. One piece stopped him cold, a child sitting alone at a grand piano in a cavernous room, her reflection fractured in the polished wood. Titled The Sound of Silence. That was me at 12, Clara said quietly, standing beside him. The night you missed my recital. You sent flowers, but I wanted your hands clapping, your voice saying, I'm proud. He closed his eyes. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, she said, turning to him. Be here now. He nodded, unable to speak. Then, in the center of the gallery, he saw it, a new painting unveiled just that morning. It showed 3 figures walking away from a crumbling mansion toward a sunlit river. The man in the middle held the hands of 2 women, one with wild curls, one with quiet eyes. Their backs were turned, but their steps were sure. Beneath it, in small script, we left the palace to find our home. Victor's knees nearly gave out. You painted us, he whispered. I painted what's real. she said. Not the fairy tale. Not the tragedy. Just us. Messy. Healing. Trying. He turned to her, tears streaming freely now. I don't deserve this. No, she agreed softly. But love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up, even late. Later, over tea in her tiny apartment above the gallery, he asked the question that had haunted him since he arrived. Do you ever regret staying connected to me after everything? She looked out the window at the narrow street below, where laundry fluttered between buildings like prayer flags. I used to think healing meant cutting you out, but real healing meant making space for you to change. And you did. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I'll never stop trying. I know, she said, squeezing back. And that's why I kept your old letters, all the ones you never sent. I knew one day you'd mean them. Outside, church bells rang in the distance. The city hummed with life, ordinary, beautiful, alive. And in that small room, filled with the scent of chamomile and oil paint, a father and daughter sat not as ghosts of the past, but as witnesses to a future they were building together. He hadn't written anything in decades. Not real words. Not the kind that bled truth instead of strategy. But tonight, something inside him cracked open. Not with pain, but with clarity. He picked up the pen again. Clara, I once believed love was something you earned through success. Through buildings with your name on them. Through bank accounts that never emptied. Through control. I thought if I gave you security, you'd never need to doubt my love. But you didn't need security. You needed me, and I wasn't there. Not at your recitals. Not at your birthdays. Not in the quiet moments when you were learning who you were, and hoping, desperately, that I'd see you. I chose a shadow, my idea of redemption, over your light. And in doing so, I nearly lost you forever. You didn't ask for grand gestures. You asked for presence. And I failed you. But you waited. Not because I deserved it, but because your heart is bigger than my mistakes. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't mine to demand. I'm writing this to say I see you now. Not as my legacy. Not as my second chance. But as Clara, brave, brilliant, and worthy of love simply because you exist. And if you'll let me, I'll spend whatever time I have left proving that. Not with money, not with promises, but with showing up. Even when it's hard. Even when I'm afraid. Even when I don't know how. Because you taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, again and again, even after we've been broken. Dad, his hand trembled as he signed it. Not Victor Langston, just Dad. The word felt foreign and sacred on the page. He folded the letter carefully, sealed it with wax pressed from a candle on her windowsill, and placed it on her pillow before slipping out into the night. He didn't stay to see her read it. He couldn't, because some truths are too heavy to witness being received. Instead, he walked through the rain-drenched streets, past shuttered cafes and glowing lamplights, until he reached the small community art space Clara had helped launch in Lisbon's Old Quarter. He'd volunteered there all week, sanding frames, hanging student work, making tea for tired artists. No one knew who he'd been. They just called him the quiet man who listens. That night, as he locked up, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia, now back in New York, preparing for her own solo show. Did you give her the letter? He typed slowly. I left it. I don't know if she'll read it, or if it's enough. Her reply came instantly. It's not about being enough, Victor. It's about being honest. And you finally were. He looked up at the sky, rain mixing with tears on his cheeks. Back at Clara's apartment, she found the letter just before dawn. She read it once, then again, then a third time, curled beneath her mother's shawl, the wax seal still warm from her hands. She didn't call him, didn't text, but the next morning, as he sipped coffee outside the art space, she appeared at the end of the street. Walking toward him, canvas bags slung over her shoulder, eyes red-rimmed but steady. She stopped in front of him, didn't speak, just held out her hand. And in it was his letter with 2 words written at the bottom in her looping script: stay. Please. He looked up at her, heart breaking and mending all at once. Then he took her hand and stood. No grand declarations. No dramatic vows. Just two people choosing to walk forward, side by side, into the uncertain, beautiful mess of what comes next. Because sometimes the most powerful words aren't spoken. They're lived. And in that quiet moment, under a Lisbon sky still damp with rain, a father and daughter begin writing a new story, not with ink, but with presence. Not as a visitor, but as part of the rhythm. Sweeping floors, framing new student work, sitting with her during lulls, talking about everything and nothing. They didn't speak much about the past. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer needed to be excavated. It had been seen, named, honored, and now it could rest. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the gallery windows, Clara turned to him while mixing paint. "There's a park nearby," she said casually, "with a bench by the river. Kids gather there after school to draw. I teach a free class on Thursdays." He looked up from the frame he was sanding. "You want me to come?" She met his eyes, soft but steady. "I want you to be there. Not as my father the benefactor. Just as you." He nodded. "I'll be there." And he was. The following Thursday, he arrived early, sitting on the edge of the grassy slope, watching children arrive with sketchpads and charcoal sticks. Clara moved among them with ease, kneeling beside a shy boy struggling with perspective, laughing with two girls arguing over whose sun was brighter. She wasn't performing. She was simply being a teacher, a guide, a woman at peace. Victor didn't interrupt. He just sat on the bench she'd pointed out, the one beneath the old olive tree, and waited. When the class ended, she walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You stayed the whole time." "I did," he said. "No phone. No distractions." "None needed," he replied, smiling faintly. "This is enough." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. For a long while, they watched the river glide by, carrying petals and paper boats downstream. Then, quietly, she said, "I used to dream of this. Just sitting with you. No agenda. No expectations. Just silence that didn't hurt." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the wounded girl who'd waited by windows, but the woman who'd built a life from scraps of hope. "I'm sorry it took me so long to give you something so simple." "It's not too late," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Just for a moment, just enough to say what words couldn't. "It's never too late to begin again." Later that evening, as they walked back through the winding streets, lanterns flickering to life above them, Victor stopped beneath an archway, strung with fairy lights. "Clara," he said, voice low, "I don't need to be your hero. I never did. But I want to be someone you can count on. Not perfectly, but consistently." She turned to him, eyes glistening. "You already are." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small key. "I signed a lease on a studio space 2 blocks from here. Nothing fancy. Just enough room for a desk, a chair, and maybe a guest." Her breath caught. "You're staying." "For as long as you'll have me," he said. "Not to fix anything. Not to prove anything. Just to be near you." She didn't cry. She just took the key, curled her fingers around it, and whispered, "Welcome home, Dad." The word home landed deep in his chest, warm and weightless, like a bird finally finding its nest. That night, as he lay in his narrow bed above the bakery, listening to the distant hum of the city and the soft chime of church bells, he thought of all the years he'd spent chasing legacy, power, control. And now, here he was, broke in wealth, rich in grace, living in a room that smelled of yeast and rain, with nothing but a daughter's trust and a second chance stitched together from honesty and time. He closed his eyes and smiled, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't building an empire. Alone, sketchbook open, pencil moving slowly across the page. He wasn't drawing grand vistas or dramatic scenes, just small things: a child's hand holding a paintbrush, a pair of worn shoes left by the path, the curve of Clara's smile as she helped a girl mix blue and yellow into green. He'd stopped trying to make art that impressed. Now he made art that remembered. Footsteps approached, light, familiar. He didn't look up, but he knew her by the rhythm. "You're getting better," Clara said, sitting beside him, handing him a paper cup of tea. He smiled faintly, still crooked. "But honest," she said, nudging his shoulder. "That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon unfold. The same bench, the same river, but everything else changed. Not fixed, not perfect, but true. A few yards away, a group of children gathered around a new mural being unveiled on the community center wall. It was a collaboration: Clara's brushwork, Sophia's sculptural reliefs embedded in the plaster, and even a few clumsy strokes from Victor's hand, hidden in the corner, where only those who looked closely would find them. The title read simply, "We Are Still Becoming." Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in rose and amber, Sophia appeared at the edge of the park, suitcase in hand, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She'd just flown in from New York, where her solo exhibition had closed to quiet acclaim. Not headlines, but heartfelt letters from strangers who said her work made them feel seen. She walked over and dropped onto the bench between them, exhaling like she'd finally come home. "Took you long enough?" Clara teased, pulling her into a one-armed hug. "I had to finish my last piece," Sophia said, grinning. "It's called The Bench Where Everything Changed." Victor laughed, a real, unguarded sound that surprised even him. "Is that what this is?" "It's where you chose us," Sophia said softly, turning to him. "Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because you finally saw us and yourself clearly." He looked at them, these two women who'd carried his failures and still offered him grace, and felt something swell in his chest that no fortune could buy. "I used to think legacy was a name on a building," he said quietly. "Now I know it's moments like this, quiet, shared, real." Clara reached for his hand. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. And for a while they just sat, three souls bound not by blood alone, but by the courage to forgive, to stay, to try again. As dusk settled, a little boy ran up to Victor, holding a crumpled drawing. "Mr. V, I drew you." Victor took it gently. It showed an old man with kind eyes, sitting on a bench with two women, all of them smiling under a sky full of stars. "Thank you," Victor said, voice thick. "I'll keep it forever." The boy beamed and ran off. Clara watched him go, then whispered, "You're someone's hero now, Dad." He shook his head. "I'm just a man who finally learned how to love." And in that ordinary moment, on a weathered bench, surrounded by laughter and fading light, Victor Langston understood the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. Wealth fades, power shifts, but love, real, patient, imperfect love, is the only legacy that truly lasts. Because it isn't built in boardrooms or written in contracts. It's woven in shared silences, in second chances, in the daily choice to show up even when you're afraid, even when you've failed, even when all you have to offer is your broken, beautiful heart. And as the first stars blinked awake above them, he held their hands a little tighter, not as a billionaire, not as a ghost of regret, but as a